If we were to look at Earth from outer space, what would you see? Just land masses, water, and clouds. We never see borders, and this is because borders only exist as a concept on paper and in man's head. Our tribal model maintained boundaries without creating contracts. People just lived where they could survive. And when an environment is no longer conducive to life, this is when we saw mass migration in both animals and humans. Because tribes are self-governing, each individual acts as their own negotiator or diplomat. If members of Tribe A are in search of new territory where they can survive, they will most likely run into other pre-existing tribes. And there will be one of two reactions from the other tribes: either camaraderie and assimilation, or hostility and forcing the other party out. If Tribe A wants to expand into the territory of Tribe B, they would have to start assimilating to the pre-existing culture of Tribe B. Assimilation is most successful when two different parties have enough in common that they can get along and work together. In my observation, environments shape ideologies, and ideologies create culture. When you have two tribes who both live in a similar region of the world and have access to similar resources and see similar phenomena, they will typically have very similar cultures and spiritual practices. This is because each environment requires certain traits in order to survive there. A more hostile environment would most likely produce a more left hemispheric culture, whereas a more plentiful environment would produce a more right hemispheric culture. These two cultures, if smashed together artificially, most likely wouldn't get along. The left hemispheric tribe would dominate and take over the right hemispheric tribe. They may also destroy the lush land because their ideology and culture is too aggressive and hostile for that environment. Tribes that share a great deal in cultural and ideological similarities will be more prone to peaceful and consensual assimilation. This is imperative to survival. The culture and spiritual practices of it gives its members the tools needed to survive in that particular location. By helping one another survive, you then strengthen the bonds of the group. In a nutshell, migration is about natural resources and assimilation. But now let's compare the natural model of migration to our modern political policy of immigration. Immigration appears to be similar to migration when looking at the surface. It's still about the acquisition of resources. However, there's one element that is often overlooked. As I've stressed in other videos, one of the main causes of poverty throughout the world is fiat currency, because fiat currency is not based in nature or anything of tangible value. When basing the economy of something of intrinsic or tangible value, one system of economics is on solid ground. So long as one maintains their patch of land, the earth will keep producing wealth for them to trade with. One tribe has gold and another has lumber. Although both possess physically different items, they're both equally valued. This ensures that one tribe is not considered less valuable than another, which prevents inequality and indentured servitude or slavery. But when basing an economy in fiat currency, one can inflate or deflate the value of another human being and their land based purely upon whim. It's a known fact that the fiat currency of China and many other countries are deliberately held lower than the fiat currency of Western countries. This is how and the only way the West is able to use slave labor of other people. Because we left our system of trade and like models, we're able to exploit the lands and resources of other people. As an example of how fiat currency works, we can equate it to our original tribal model. Let's say that Tribe A has a bounty in tangerines, while Tribe B has a bounty in cherries. An even trade would be 4 ounces of tangerines in exchange for 4 ounces in cherries. With fiat currency, however, it would be the equivalent of Tribe A exchanging 1 ounce of tangerines for 4 ounces of cherries, for no other reason than Tribe A says so and Tribe B goes along with it. This discrepancy automatically requires Tribe B to harvest 4 times the quantity and work 4 times harder than Tribe A. This is what fiat currency encourages. This is why we see slavery, indentured servitude, and an unhealthy planet. Soon Tribe B will start running out of resources and land, thus throwing them deeper into poverty. Seeing the wealth of Tribe A, the poverty-stricken members of Tribe B want to leave their land and people behind and join Tribe A. Not to sound mean, but what would be the benefit of Tribe A letting their former slaves join them as equals? There isn't any. There is only one incentive for Tribe A to allow members of Tribe B into their group. You can see this with the Hispanic population immigrating into the U.S. Hispanic immigrants are used as slave labor, essentially. Because they aren't citizens, they are forced to take low-paying grunt work, such as picking crops or being maids. Immigrants make more than they would have if they stayed in their homeland, but here in America, immigrants are essentially indentured servants. Dodgy economic practices and corporations forced countries into poverty, and it's that same dodgy economic practice and corporations that keep them there so they can be utilized for profit. What people in the West are experiencing isn't natural migration. If the migration was natural, then wealth would be dependent upon the earth. Mexicans would only leave Mexico if it became barren and no longer sustainable to life. Once finding a patch of fertile land, those people could begin to build their wealth again. But with immigration, wealth of the land doesn't matter. And more often than not, those who live on the wealthiest lands tend to be the ones who are subjugated into indentured servitude, even if they're American. Wealth is given up to a corporation and therefore a minority group of people. Then it's allocated back in controlled amounts through minimum wage and other pay scale brackets. This is also why we hear so many Americans, often Trump supporters, screaming for no more immigration. Before the immigrants took those grunt work positions, it was Americans who held those jobs, and for higher pay. Corporations, with government assistance, took jobs away from citizens and gave it to immigrants for slave wages. Now citizens are left with taking jobs for less pay, essentially becoming indentured servants themselves. Or they may be out of work altogether. Herein lies the hostility, which in some cases leads to racism. A mutual racism, I might add. Some white people dislike Hispanics for taking their livelihoods away, and a large number of Hispanics hate white people for enslaving them both in their homelands and here in America. But neither party ever looks at the economic system set in place by a minority group of elitists. Elitists who aren't necessarily of European descent, but that's a topic for another day. America isn't the wealthiest country because of her natural resources. She's the wealthiest because our global fiat system makes it so that the wealth of the world is given to America and the West. Because America and the West holds the wealth of the world, people from other countries are forced to come here in order to get what they need to survive. These immigrants are essentially forced to continue the system of slavery and subjugation of their own people and homelands. By working in America, they indirectly enslave their own people. From my observations, many immigrants don't move to America to uphold American values and culture. They either come here for lifestyle or to get away from their war-torn country. A country that became war-torn due to poverty, which is due to the global fiat system. From my research and deductive reasoning, America was founded by sovereigns for sovereigns. The highest law of this nation is natural law, which is what the Constitution is based on. As an aside, the Constitution is not the highest governing laws in America. Natural law, also known as God's law, moral law, and the unwritten law, is the idea that all men are created equal because all men are creatures of God. And so long as one doesn't hurt the life or property of another, one is free to do as they choose. This is liberty. The only reason why slavery existed in America was because African Americans were considered animals, not humans. The papers which emancipated them weren't freedom papers. They were legal documents acknowledging that they were human. Once legally acknowledged as human, they were then bestowed the same rights as all other humans in this country. At least they were supposed to. Natural law is the idea of self-governance, which is why America is a republic. The democracy only applied to the 10-mile square of Washington, D.C. up until 1933. But that's a tangent. My point is, America, like all other countries in the world, had an established culture and ideology. This culture and ideology has been warped throughout the years due to media propaganda and public brainwashing, education. These false cultures are then promoted throughout the world, and now most people, including Americans, believe American culture is about materialism and being a narcissist, individualist. Although many Republicans are just as brainwashed as anybody else, in my observation, I found that they uphold the original principles of this nation more so than any other political group, though they've been enamored by the fiat-based capitalist system, which is destroying that which they try to preserve. I'm not saying that I hate other cultures. I've already established that culture is imperative to survival and keeping members of the group bonded together. But when there's a large volume of immigrants bringing their own ideologies and cultures into the mix, it waters down the culture and ideology of the people who built the nation. People say they want diversity, but I often wonder if they know what they're asking for. In order for there to be diversity, there must first be a divide or separation. Germans have a different culture from the French because they're separate from French people and have developed their own way of being. If the countries decide to become one, it will create a single culture instead of two separate cultures. By combining people of different backgrounds, you actually lose diversity, not gain it. I can offer myself as a prime example being biracial. My mother is German American and my father is African American. I do not know how to speak German, I do not know how to cook German cuisine, and I don't know any German holidays or anything about Germany at all. And I know even less about my father's half of the family because they were slaves and their culture was obliterated as soon as they arrived here. By becoming one and becoming American, my parents abandoned their cultures and created a new one, completely divorced from the old. You can prove this for yourself just by looking at how we label ourselves for school and job applications, as well as various demographic surveys. When you look at the selection list on one of these documents, it never lists all types of ethnicities you could be. It just says Asian, black, white, etc. That's because in America, your heritage and culture isn't recognized by the general masses anymore. You're not Vietnamese, you're Asian. You're not Nigerian, you're black. And you're not Swedish, you're just white. Your entire culture and heritage is wiped clean with the filling in of a bubble. I notice people accept general labels when it can be used as a bargaining chip in politics, but in person, they're just as segregated as usual. If diversity in the form of coming together as one is what you seek, then you are seeking for the removal or alteration of your original culture and ideology. Although this is somewhat what I see in America, I mainly see the tension of division. I see people trying to share land, but maintain their cultural separations. I live in Los Angeles County, where the Chinese live in Arcadia, African Americans live in Inglewood, Hispanics live in Highland Park, Armenians live in Glendale, Koreans live in Koreatown, and European Americans live in Santa Monica. We're all American by paperwork, but not by culture. Every city of LA has its own flavor, and most don't really get along. I won't name names, but there are several cities I prefer to avoid because I don't like the culture there and I don't feel welcome. In some cities, I'm followed around the store like a criminal because I'm half black. In other places, I feel attacked because I'm seen as a white supremacist supporter. It's human and animal nature to be around those who are just like you. Birds of a feather flock together. The familiar is safe, trustworthy, and the unfamiliar is dangerous. That's not racist, it just is. Diversity is only successful when people remain separate from each other. When trying to smash completely different cultures together into one, you will run into misunderstandings, which leads to hostility and an us versus them mentality. There are some things Asians do which I find completely rude. The same goes for Middle Easterns and Pacific Islanders and all others, and vice versa. People are very quick to inform me when I step out of their cultural lines, and this is because I was socialized in a European American neighborhood. There are certain body gestures, certain phrases, and certain ways of conducting yourself depending on which culture you were socialized in. Here in Los Angeles, we have roughly 100 different cultures living in a relatively small area. People are stepping on each other's toes, left, right, front, and center. This is because people don't actually want to become one with each other. They don't want to share the same culture. They want to maintain their differences and not get rid of them. I hear immigrants and first-generation Americans say all the time how proud they are to be Armenian or how proud they are to be Salvadorian or whatever else they are. And I almost never hear people say how proud they are to be American. The only people who refer to themselves as American only are predominantly white people, and that's because they built this nation. People don't typically start referring to themselves as American until the third or fourth generation, and that's only if they've fully assimilated. There are many pockets of Los Angeles, and I assume other parts of the country, where people have created a mini version of the country they just left. There are many people in those communities who don't speak English very well, and they've been in America for multiple generations. That's because most people mainly move here for job opportunities and therefore money. And I don't blame them because the West has been used to dominate and subjugate the planet. They have no intention in becoming one race and have every intention on staying within their own cultural boundaries. Because everybody has conflicting ideas, there is always a clash in society. Nobody is or ever will be on the same page so long as everyone clings to their own separate cultures. As people cling to their old cultures, they become angry with Americans who have been here the entire time. White people are usually Republican because that party upholds the original values of the country more so than any other political party. Immigrants, city dwellers, and minorities tend to vote Democratic because they've been conditioned into believing that what's wrong with society are laws surrounding individual, seemingly unrelated issues. But in reality, all problems originate from the same source, which is the globally accepted fiat economy. There is no need to fight for new laws ensuring individual rights because those laws were already set in place in the Declaration of Independence. What people should be doing is upholding the original laws, not modifying or creating new ones that elevate some groups over others. What I often hear from immigrants and first and second generation Americans is how they have the right to modifying American laws to suit their individual needs. In my opinion, if you want your own culture, then you should stay in your homeland, stop supporting Western corporations and media entertainment, and get off of a fiat-based economy. Easier said than done because many countries are no longer conducive to a peaceful way of life. It's either war-torn, tyrannical, impoverished, or all of the above. But again, this is because of our global fiat system. But back to my original point, immigration causes the watering down of the pre-existing culture. If you come to America because you love her culture, then you must assimilate and keep that culture going. There is no other way to maintain it. Diversity is the act of dividing the people. This is fine because we and animals do this naturally. Although Koreans and Japanese look similar to an outsider, there is still a cultural divide, which is why they are separate from each other. This separation of cultures is needed in order to maintain diversity and keep one's heritage alive. If you were to force all Asians from various countries to live all together, this eliminates cultural differences and therefore eliminates diversity. Common ground must be created in order to maintain peace, but creating common ground comes with a sacrifice. You must sacrifice the majority of your old heritage in order to make room for a new one. Using LA as an example, obviously people don't want to abandon their heritage in favor of creating a new one, and this is why we have the conflicts we do now. As everyone is fighting with each other, nobody is paying attention to the real problem at hand, which is our corrupted, fraudulent, fiat-based global economic system and the minority group of elitists who are making bank off the masses. Migration is a product of environmental changes. It's natural. And when people move to another territory, it's done gradually. They will either enter an empty patch of land or they assimilate with their neighbors who are already very similar to them and therefore it's peaceful and not seen as an invasion. Immigration, however, is unnatural. It's the product of a man-made economy which is not based in nature anymore. Immigration causes resentment from both parties. Resentment from natives because they must now make do with less and watch their old way of life be overturned, and many feel pushed out. Immigrants feel resentful because they feel entitled to living in the new land and installing their old traditions into it, but they don't understand why they aren't welcomed with open arms and don't understand why they're stuck with the shitty jobs. If you want to live peacefully, build your people's wealth, keep your culture, and maintain diversity, you must remain separate, get off of a fiat-based economy, and back to an economy based in tangible assets. For all of you Republicans and perhaps Blue Dog Democrats who want to end immigration or at least greatly reduce it, you must do the same. Get America off of a fiat-based economy as much as possible. If everyone based their currency in tangible assets, then the wealth of our nations will be restored, allowing us to live peacefully in our homelands, undisturbed by war or racism. Fiat currency should only be used during emergencies and harsh times, i.e. when there's a drought and the farms didn't produce enough to feed their people or participate in commerce. Fiat currency can be used during times like these because it's essentially a promise to pay or trade in the future. You're asking another tribe for a favor. The bill of exchange you trade is based in debt and is basically an IOU. If your environment goes back to normal within 1 to 5 years, depending on the devastation and hardship of the area, you can begin to repay the tribes that helped you. However, if you experience a prolonged hardship or the environment you're living in is chronically inconducive to plant, animal, and human survival, migration is imperative for all involved, because you are essentially bankrupt. It is illogical to use fiat currency as a permanent way of life. If your economy is permanently based in debt, then the people living within that system will always and forever be indentured servants.